Welcome to a house that was never meant to die. 1872, Mississippi. They call it the Conjure House, a name whispered in porches and prayer circles, always with a tremor, as if the syllables themselves still carried weight from the past. The story begins where the swamp meets the cotton road, where lanterns once swung from wooden posts and the air at night felt thick enough to hold a spirit's breath. They say the woman who lived here could speak to the wind, that she healed wounds that doctors feared to touch, that she knew the names of the dead and the way they walked between storms. Her name was Rachel, born enslaved, freed by paper, but bound by memory, and when she vanished one summer evening, the fields grew quiet. Even the frogs along the bayou went still. Welcome to the night Mississippi held its breath. The neighbors said a strange blue light was seen inside her house that week, a flickering glow. Not fire, not lamp. Something older, colder, moving as if it had a pulse of its own. By dawn, the chimney had collapsed inward, and the ground beneath smelled of iron and rain. No one dared step across the threshold after that. Some said Rachel was taken. Others swore she'd returned to the roots beneath the house, her voice still humming in the wood. Before we begin, leave a comment where you're watching from, and the exact time you're hearing this voice, because somewhere between your world and hers, the line has never really closed. They called it the Conjure House, but those who passed it after sunset called it something else. They said if you stopped by the gate and listened carefully, you could hear the sound of a woman praying slow, rhythmic, not quite English, not quite anything living. The same rhythm the slaves once used to summon rain, to speak to ancestors, to cross that thin space between breath and silence. And on nights when the fog rolls in from the river, if you see a single candle burning through the cracked window, don't look away. Because what you'll see is not the past returning, it's the present remembering. 1872, a humid, heavy year in the heart of Mississippi. The Reconstruction South still trembling under the weight of freedom, newly written but rarely felt. The war had ended less than a decade ago. Yet the soil still smelled of gunpowder and grief. You could taste it in the rain. You could hear it in the quiet between sermons. The world was supposed to have changed. But for most who had once been enslaved, the chains had only shifted shape. Somewhere between Vicksburg and Natchez, down a narrow road that bent through the bayou like a scar, stood a cluster of cabins they called Hollow Bend. Once a plantation, now only the bones of one. The cotton rows were gone, swallowed by vines and wild cane. Yet the shadows of the overseer's porch still stretched long at sunset. And in the center, stubborn unmoved, stood the Conjure House. It wasn't always called that. Before the war, it was just a small wooden cabin with whitewashed walls and a tin roof that sang when it rained. But after emancipation, everything changed. The woman who lived there, Rachel, refused to leave when others did. She stayed behind, claiming the land that had once claimed her. If my sweat built this floor, she said, then my soul will hold it steady. Her defiance earned her both reverence and fear. By day, Rachel worked as a healer, the kind the freedmen trusted more than any doctor. She mixed herbs, whispered psalms, tied roots inside cloth and buried them by moonlight. The newly freed came to her for sickness, for bad dreams, for lost children and broken promises. And when something vanished, a cow, a watch, a husband, they came again hoping she could see beyond what eyes could manage. The women called her Miss Rachel. The white townsfolk called her that Conjure Woman. It was a dangerous name to carry in 1872. Freedom had cracked the old world open, but suspicion had rushed in to fill the gap. Across Mississippi, whispers spread of root workers, hoodoo women, ghost singers. Preachers thundered against them on Sundays, yet those same preachers' wives came quietly after dark, asking for remedies that no hymn could grant. The South was learning to live with its ghosts. and to fear the ones who could speak to them. The nights in Hollow Bend had their own rhythm. The croak of frogs, the hum of insects, the faraway sigh of the river. But sometimes just before dawn came another sound, faint metallic, like chains shifting deep under the ground. The elders said it was the earth remembering. Others said it was Rachel praying. By then the Freedmen's Bureau had already left. The Union troops had gone home. The courthouse in town flew a new flag, but inside the laws hadn't changed much. Sharecropping had replaced slavery, and freedom had become a debt measured in cotton and silence. Still, something unseen was rising, a current of defiance that no paper could erase. Rachel's cabin became part of that current. Some nights, a single lantern burned through the trees, a faint, steady light in the dark. People came quietly walking barefoot through the mud, bringing small bundles wrapped in cloth. Inside, there would be a circle, a Bible, a bowl of river water, a table where hands met in prayer. The air smelled of smoke, sweat, and jasmine. They prayed, but not like the preachers did. Their words wound through forgotten languages, half hymn, half memory. Those who came left lighter, as if something had been lifted from their shoulders. Yet the sheriff came one afternoon, hat in hand, badge gleaming in the heat, and told her it had to stop. "You're stirring them up," he said. "They need the Lord, not your spells." Rachel only looked at him, steady, silent, then said, "We are the Lord's, and we're the ones he didn't forget." Then came the flood. The Pearl River rose like a living thing. Fences gone fields, drowned livestock floating downriver. Families fled to high ground, clutching what little they could carry. But when the storm broke, Rachel's house still stood untouched, dry as if the water had split around it. People called it a miracle. Others called it proof. A small column appeared in the Jackson Daily Clarion-colored Woman claims, "Divine favor home spared in Hollow Bend flood." The writer meant it as mockery. But to those who knew her, it was gospel. From that day on, strangers began to appear. Some came for healing, some for hope, some for revenge. They left offerings at her door, sugared tobacco coins, locks of hair. They whispered her name in fields before planting seed. They sang her songs at funerals, and as the legend grew, so did the unease. A white landowner named Cyrus Hale, whose fields bordered the bend, began spreading word that Rachel's circles were dangerous. He claimed they were plotting rebellion. "She fills their heads with ghosts," he wrote, "and they come out believing they are free men." Not long after, 2 sharecroppers vanished near the woods. Another was found days later, muttering of lights in the trees. Songs with no singers. The paper blamed swamp fever, but no one believed it. Rachel had warned them not to go near the bayou that week. Said she dreamt of a shadow walking on the water. By midsummer, the air turned thick enough to choke. Children woke from nightmares, hands reaching through the walls. Dogs barked at nothing. The cicadas went silent. Even the river seemed to hold its breath. Through it all, her cabin glowed. That same blue flickering light behind the window, steady as heartbeat, cold as prayer. Those who passed by said they heard music low, mournful like hymns sung underwater. A Union veteran passing through wrote in his diary, "Stopped near Hollow Bend. Heard voices, or maybe the wind. Locals call her the Conjure Woman." In this place, faith and fear wear the same face. He was never seen again. And so the story thickened layer by layer, record by rumor. A freedwoman who claimed her ground. A house that defied the flood. A light that never went out. History would call it superstition, folklore, born of ignorance. But to the people who lived there, it was memory living, breathing memory, the kind that hums beneath your feet when the first drops of rain touch the earth. They say the Conjure House still stands, bowed and leaning, buried beneath vines and moss. Its windows clouded with dust, its door half open as if waiting. And if you walk near it, if the air goes still and the swamp wind holds its breath, you might feel it too. That faint, slow rhythm rising from the ground. The heartbeat of something that refuses to die. The sound of a woman praying, in a language the world tried to forget. They say every haunting begins with a record, even the ones that no one meant to keep. In the case of the Conjure House, the paper trail begins small, almost nothing at all. A line in the Freedmen's Bureau Register, 1871-73. Rachel's surname, unknown healer, residing near Hollow Bend, claims ownership of 2 acres formerly belonging to the Hale Plantation. That's it. No birth date, no family, no age, just a woman, a name, and a claim to land the law said she couldn't rightfully hold. But history is clever. It leaves fingerprints where it doesn't leave faces. If you follow the Bureau's trail deeper, you find letters fragments written by agents stationed in Adams County. One reads, "Colored woman persists in gatherings by night, said to invoke African spirits. Locals report strange fires seen above the tree line. I recommend continued observation." Continued observation. It's the kind of phrase bureaucrats use when they don't want to say what they really mean. There's another record, a ledger from a local church, St. Matthew's, dated June 1872. In the notes beside the attendance sheet, a Reverend J.P. Lathrop writes, "Many of the colored parishioners absent this Sabbath. Rumors of secret prayer meetings by the swamp. A woman leads them, Rachel the Conjurer. Then, beneath that, in the same ink, fear of idolatry spreading. I shall visit soon." He never did. What remains of him is a folded page in the diocesan archive, an unfinished sermon on temptations of the old gods. The ink trails off halfway through the word deliverance. The rest, the heart of the Conjure House, exists in stories told not with ink, but with breath. Old men by porch light, women who learned to pray with one eye open. The descendants of those who came to Rachel's gatherings and swore they saw something that wasn't of this world. One story says the house itself was alive, that the boards creaked not from wind, but from voices underneath. That when Rachel spoke in tongues, the sound didn't echo off the walls. It came from within them. They say the jars she kept on her shelves, herbs, river stones, old coins, would rattle when she prayed, as if something invisible was answering. Another tells of a night when a man came to test her. A deputy sent by Hale, drunk with authority. He rode up to her porch with 2 men and a torch, shouting that she was a witch. Rachel stepped out, calm, barefoot eyes shining in the lamplight. "Witch," she said softly. "No. I just know the names of things you forgot." He laughed and threw his torch at her roof. The flame hit the wood and died. No smoke, no burn, just a hiss like rain on metal. They say the deputy sobered right there. They say he ran until his boots split. No one ever came to her house with fire again. But beneath the stories, the facts whisper too. The Natchez Weekly Democrat, September 1872, carried a strange notice: local disturbances near Hollow Bend. Residents report lights in swamp, possible contraband activity. No arrests were made. No further reports filed. But tucked beneath that same issue in the death notices appears a name: Hale Cyrus M., age 53, found drowned near Pearl River Ford. Official cause: accidental fall. Unofficially, they said his body was found kneeling, head submerged, hat still in hand. The folklore says the river took him back. Rachel didn't speak of it. But after that night, the lantern in her window never went out. The WPA interviews, recorded half a century later, mention her like a shadow between memories. One elderly woman, born on that same plantation, told an interviewer, "Miss Rachel, she knew the spirit road. She could send dreams to you. I seen her once. She say keep your feet out the flood water or it gon' whisper you away. And when I didn't listen, my boy near drowned next morning." Another said, "She don't talk loud. You don't need her to. When she hummed, the air hummed back." It's easy to dismiss its superstition memory warped by time, but every story that survives this long carries a reason to live. The Conjure House wasn't built just of wood. It was built of survival. To the freed people of Hollow Bend, Rachel wasn't a witch or a prophet. She was proof that something inside them still spoke the language of the ancestors, the language that had survived the fields, the chains, the crossings. She carried songs older than scripture. Some said they were African. Others said they were born right there in the blood and the heat of the Delta. The rhythms came like breath call and response, the echo of the old ring shouts, where feet pounded dirt and spirits rose with the dust. The white men called it devil music. The people called it home. And when the storms came, thunder rolling across the bayou, like the memory of drums, Rachel would stand in her doorway, eyes closed, and hum. A low sound somewhere between sorrow and command. The lightning never struck her roof. A former Union nurse, Margaret Ellis, mentioned her in a letter to her sister. The colored woman here is said to heal soldiers' fever with roots and song. I visited her hut. She spoke kindly, but the air was thick as if the very ground was listening. The nurse died that winter of yellow fever. Her belongings, including that letter, were found years later in a box of unclaimed effects. The local school teacher, one of the few literate black women in the parish, kept her own record. In the margins of her notebook, she wrote Rachel's house glows blue some nights. Not fire, not lamp. The children say she keeps souls in jars. I think maybe she just keeps memory. That phrase, she keeps memory, would echo through generations. The stories told after dark always start the same. You ever heard the hum from Hollow Bend? Some say it's the wind across the water. Some say it's the echo of chains still buried beneath the soil. But the old folks, the ones who remember Rachel, say it's her. Still praying, still singing, keeping memory alive when the rest of the world wants it gone. Folklore says the night before she vanished, a strange mist rolled through the bend, thick white smelling faintly of gardenia. Her neighbors woke to find her door open, her table cleared, her Bible missing. Only the lantern remained still burning wick, unconsumed. But the cold paper record, tells another story. In 1873, the county ledger lists her as relocated unknown. No reason given, no witness named, just one word beside her name, fate unknown. That phrase appears again in another place, in a Freedmen's Bureau report cataloging missing persons after a string of night raids by white militias. The date. Same week Rachel disappeared. The map reference. Within a mile of Hollow Bend. No one ever found her body. Yet decades later, people swore they saw her shadow by the old Bend Road. Sometimes just after rain, when the air smelled of wet clay and lightning. A tall figure in white, walking barefoot through the fog, humming the tune of an old spiritual, "Didn't my Lord deliver Daniel? Deliver Daniel. Deliver Daniel." The voice fades, but the melody lingers like something half-remembered from a dream. Fact and folklore, truth and tremor. One keeps the other alive. The archives give you ink. But the people, they give you pulse. And somewhere between them, in that fragile space where the paper ends and the whisper begins, the real story breathes. Rachel might have vanished from the Bureau's pages, but not from the bayou's memory. Her name became a warning and a promise. Mothers told their children, don't stray too close to the Conjure House after dark. But some said that if you did, and if you carried sorrow deep enough to shake the soul, you might hear her hum from the water, soft and slow, saying, "You're not forgotten." The Conjure House was never just a building. It was a wound that refused to close. And every record, every story, every jar of roots or piece of glass found near that bend still hums with her name, Rachel, the woman who healed the living and refused to let the dead be silent. Even now, if you listen close, in the pause between thunder and rain, you might hear her humming, waiting, watching. Not gone, just patient. By the time autumn crept across Mississippi, the Conjure House had become more than a legend. It was a pulse. You could feel it if you stood near the cypress roots after dark, that faint vibration underfoot, as if something in the soil remembered the way the drums used to sound before the war. The year was 1873, the harvest season when the fields around Hollow Bend shimmered gold by day and turned black and breathless by night. The town whispered of strange things, lanterns flickering where no hand held them, footprints on the road that led to nowhere, children waking from sleep with songs they swore they didn't know. The sheriff sent men to patrol, but they never lasted long. They'd come back, pale lips, trembling eyes hollow. "It's just fog," he said, once voice cracking, just the river breathing wrong. But even he stopped going out after sundown. And then came the night the light changed color. A farmer named Lewis Grant, a freedman in his 40s, was walking home from the river road after delivering cornmeal to town. The moon was low orange swollen, and the air smelled like burnt sugar. He heard it first before he saw it. A hum, low and steady, like bees under glass. Then the light, a strange soft blue spilling from the direction of the Conjure House. Not flame, not lightning, something else, something alive. He told his wife later that he tried to look away, but couldn't. His feet kept walking. His shadow stretched ahead of him like it was being pulled. When he reached the clearing, the house was silent. The door stood open, and inside the air shimmered like heat above a forge. He said he saw shapes, not people exactly, but outlines, tall, thin, bending like reeds in wind. One of them turned, and for a moment he swore it looked like Rachel, then nothing. A burst of wind, a smell like iron. And he woke hours later lying on the road, clothes damp with dew. They found him the next morning wandering toward town, barefoot shaking, muttering the same words over and over, "She ain't gone. She ain't gone." For weeks afterward, people reported the same light. Always blue, always silent. Sometimes hovering just above the tree line, sometimes flashing across the water. The children called it Miss Rachel's lamp. The elders called it a warning. One evening, a man from the next county, a trader who didn't believe in such things, decided to see it for himself. He brought a lantern, a pistol, and a flask. "Ain't no spirit gonna scare me," he told the others. He was last seen crossing the wooden bridge near Hollow Bend. His horse came back at dawn without him, rain-snapped eyes wide, coat slick with sweat. Days later, a fisherman found his flask floating by the bayou edge, the metal warped as if burned by lightning. The paper didn't print that story. They called it rumor. But even rumor has roots, and those roots grow deep. Meanwhile, strange entries began to appear in the courthouse ledgers. Unexplained property claims, witness signatures missing from records, and a note unsigned left on the clerk's desk. "Tell them she's still here. Tell them the land remembers." The ink was brown faded, maybe blood. In the following months, 3 more families left Hollow Bend. No one said why. They packed quietly at dusk and drove their wagons north. When asked, they only said, "We don't sleep well, they're no more." But not everyone ran. Some stayed drawn by something they couldn't name. Nights when the air grew thick and the moon hid behind clouds, they'd gather near the river, listening for her hum. They said it brought calm, a kind of safety. One old man said if Miss Rachel's near them, night riders won't come. And for a while, he was right. Then came January, cold, sharp, brittle. A white frost coated the trees like lace. The swamp froze in places it never had before. And one night that quiet broke. It started with hoofbeats faint, then growing echoing through the cane. Torches flared between the trees. The riders came like ghosts themselves. Faces hid in hoods, low rifles slung over shoulders. They called themselves regulators. They said they were there to keep peace. But peace never rides with fire. They surrounded Hollow Bend before dawn, searching for agitators, for troublemakers. They found neither, only silence, and the Conjure House standing alone in the mist. No one knows exactly what happened that morning. The records stop where the noise begins. But an entry found years later, buried in an 1873 dispatch from the Freedmen's Bureau's last remaining field officer, offers a clue. Arrived Hollow Bend. Area abandoned. One dwelling partially burned, but not destroyed. Interior walls show signs of chemical reaction, blue discoloration. Locals refuse to approach. Report ends. Blue discoloration, the same color that haunted their nights. After that raid, the Conjure House stood in ruin, half charred, yet still upright, as if the earth refused to let it fall. The villagers said it glowed faintly for days afterward, even without a fire inside. They said if you stepped too close, the air thickened like water, like breath, and the ground pulsed beneath your feet. The next spring, the crops failed. Not from drought, from something else. The soil turned hard, cracked like old skin. The wells went dry, and the frogs left the bayou. The townspeople said the land was cursed. The elders said it was mourning. In the WPA archives, one testimony stands out. A woman named Evelyn Brooks, born just after the war, told an interviewer in 1937, "When I was a girl, Mama took me by that place. Said, 'Don't never talk loud there. Don't even breathe loud.' I asked her why. She said, 'That's where the prayers got stuck in the ground.'" Another record, a court transcript from 1874, reveals that 2 men were tried for night disturbance and assault near Hollow Bend. The verdict, not guilty. But one of the defendants years later confessed on his deathbed. A nurse wrote down his final words, "We went to burn her out." But she was already gone. Still the house talked. It said our names. He died before explaining what he meant. Somewhere between those confessions and those silences, the legend began to harden, the kind of story that doesn't belong to any one voice anymore. It became part of Mississippi's undercurrent, the whispered truth that the living keep close but never speak aloud. Old churchgoers said Rachel's spirit had become a guardian, that she walked the road between the freed and the forgotten, warning them of danger. Sharecroppers swore they heard her singing before raids, the tune drifting over the fields like mist, and when the cicadas fell silent, they knew it meant trouble was near. Even the white townsfolk began to speak carefully near the bend. One preacher, who'd once called her demon-born, began preaching mercy instead of damnation. He told his congregation, "Sometimes the Lord leaves angels where the devil tried to dig graves." But beneath all the sermons and superstition, something deeper moved. Folklore turned into ritual. The young began to leave offerings, at the edge of the swamp coins, tobacco bits of glass. Some said it was for luck. Others said it was payment, a promise that they remembered. The Conjure House became a boundary not between life and death, but between forgetting and remembrance. And sometimes, when the fog was heavy and the stars refused to show travelers passing through, said they saw a woman by the road, tall, quiet, her dress pale as moonlight. She would lift one hand, not in greeting, not in warning, just a gesture soft and slow, as if to say, "You see me now." Then she'd vanish. The legend reached as far as New Orleans by 1880. Hoodoo priests whispered her name in rituals. Jazz singers turned her hum into melody. In Storyville, they called her the Blue Saint. In Natchez, she was the Bayou Angel. But in Hollow Bend, she was still just Rachel. Fact or folklore, no one could tell where one ended and the other began. The Bureau had closed, the archives were sealed. The newspapers had moved on. But every so often, someone new would come searching, a reporter, a preacher, a skeptic, drawn by the same pull that had taken so many before them. They always started with confidence, notebooks in hand. Lanterns lit, certain they'd find logic beneath the myth. And always, they ended the same way, their words trailing off mid-sentence. The ink smudged, the paper damp as if it had been left in rain. Maybe they heard the hum. Maybe they saw the light. Maybe they realized too late that the past doesn't vanish when it's buried. It just waits. And the Conjure House, silent, broken breathing, waited too, waiting for the next name to call, waiting for the next story to finish the one she began, because every haunting needs a witness. And sometimes that witness is you. So if you ever find yourself near Hollow Bend, Mississippi, and you see a flicker of blue in the trees, don't follow it. Don't call out. Just listen. Because that's how stories survive, not by being seen, but by being heard. Time moved on. But Hollow Bend never did. The world outside changed. Trains cut through the delta. Telegraph wires rose like steel veins across the sky. Towns sprouted where cotton once ruled, yet down by the swamp, silence stayed thick as syrup. The Conjure House had half collapsed by the 1890s, its roof bowed, its windows blind, but people still crossed themselves when they passed. They said you could feel a draft there, even when the air stood still, like the house itself was still breathing. Officially, the records ended in 1873. One federal survey called the site simply uninhabited zone. But a generation later, something else surfaced, faint traces half seen through the paper fog of time. In 1902, a surveyor from Jackson mapping property boundaries for the county noted something odd in his field journal. Old structure near the bend emits phosphorescent glow at dusk. Locals claim no one lives there yet, fresh footprints seen. Declined to investigate further. He underlined that last sentence twice, and then there was the photograph. Grainy, sepia, labeled Adams County C, 1905. A ruin of a cabin half submerged in fog. A faint streak of light cuts across the doorway, not lens flare, not reflection. When archivists examined the negative decades later, they noticed tiny scratches along the edge, as if someone had tried to scrape away a shape, a figure. That photograph sits in the state archive today. No origin, no credit, no note of who took it. Only a single sentence handwritten on the back in faded ink. She's still keeping watch. By then, the local papers had stopped printing ghost stories. Too modern, too proud. The new century wanted progress, not memory. But memory doesn't care what century it is. It lingers, like humidity that never leaves your skin. And in the small corners, where stories still breathed porches, prayer circles, field songs, Rachel's name lived on. You can still hear her echo in early field recordings, wax cylinders captured by ethnographers who didn't know what they were hearing. One recording labeled Delta Hymn plays a woman's voice humming slow, wordless, low as thunder in the distance. Between breaths, through the static comes one line. Light in the window, Lord. Keep the flood from rising. That melody, that fragile line reappears years later in a gospel hymn recorded in Natchez. A man there claimed it was his grandmother's song, and she learned it, he said, from the woman by the bayou. Miss Rachel, that's where the folklore deepens, where the border between belief and proof dissolves. Because not everyone believed she died. Some said she changed. One story says she never left Hollow Bend, that she stepped through instead of away. They say it happened during a storm when lightning split the cypress and the river rose like a living thing. She stood in her doorway, whispering a prayer no one understood, and vanished in a flash of blue light, not consumed, transformed. The swamp went silent for 3 days after that. No frogs, no wind, no birds. Just stillness, like the earth was holding its breath. Another story carried north with the exodusters said she was rescued by a traveling preacher, that she became part of a freedom crusade healing the sick with river water and words the preacher couldn't translate. They called it the river testimony. But even in those tales, the end was always the same. She returned, always south, always to Hollow Bend. Because spirits bound by memory don't wander far. And then there are the stories too eerie for even believers to tell without lowering their voice. In 1913, a journalist from the New Orleans Picayune, Samuel Porter, wrote an article called Phantoms of the Freedmen's Roads. Buried in his column was a single paragraph about a ghost light seen near a ruined cabin in Adams County. He described a woman-shaped silhouette carrying a small lantern that flickered blue, drifting between the trees. His editor cut most of it. Too fantastical, he said. But Porter's notebook survived. In the margin beside his sketches, he wrote 2 sentences, hurried uneven, almost like a confession. Her song stops the crickets. The air smells like iron. 2 months later, Porter drowned while covering a flood upriver. His notebook inexplicably was found dry, tucked inside his coat. But history leaves its own kind of ghosts, too. In the National Archives box 4A7 of the Freedmen's Bureau remnants lies an unsigned affidavit by a former agent named H.J. Trow, written in 1889, filed with no seal. In it, he claims to have revisited Hollow Bend after the Bureau's closure. The text reads, "The area remains deserted, save one ruin. Entered near dusk. Heard low vibrations, thought perhaps frogs or insects, but no sound matched it. It came from the ground steady as heartbeat. Found traces of gathering circles in dirt ashes still warm. Unearthed 1 glass jar, half buried near hearth. Inside lock of hair and scrap of paper with names. All of them Bureau men." The affidavit ends abruptly. No signature, no follow-up. Trow's wife applied for widow's benefits 3 months later. Cause disappeared in field. Folklore keeps what paper loses. In black churches across Mississippi, the Conjure woman began to change shape. She became Mother Rachel, a quiet saint of the margins, protector of the forgotten, keeper of lost names. Her likeness appeared in carvings, in window glass and altar cloths, though no one admitted placing them. Always the same figure, a woman in white lantern in hand, eyes half closed as if listening. The sermons changed too. Preachers spoke of the spirit that guards the crossings, that thin place between the living and the dead, between what's told and what's hidden. Some said Hollow Bend was one of those crossings. Others whispered that Rachel herself was the crossing. Every few years when the Pearl River rose high, people swore they saw the blue glow again, drifting slow above the floodwater, moving against the current. A fisherman named Elijah Carter tried to follow it one year. Deacon father of 4. His boat was found downstream, upright nets, folded untouched. His youngest daughter woke the same night crying that Mama Rachel called Daddy home. The flood receded the next day. At the site of the old cabin, someone found a single footprint in the mud, small, bare, facing the water. Historians later called it coincidence, cultural residue, grief made visible, but even grief has rhythm. And sometimes that rhythm sounds like a heartbeat under the ground. In 1932, a federal folklore writer interviewed an old man who said he'd been a child in Hollow Bend. His voice crackling through static said she weren't evil. She just talked to the dead like they was kin. When she gone, they ain't had no one left to listen, so they keep talking. The interviewer asked, "Talkin', you mean ghosts?" He laughed a dry, trembling sound and answered, "No, ma'am. The ground. It hums if you listen long enough." That sentence, "The ground hums if you listen long enough," has haunted every researcher since. Some call it metaphor. Others went there themselves, stood on that patch of soil where the cabin once leaned, and swore they felt it. A low tremor, soft, steady pulsing like breath beneath the surface. One even brought a recorder. The tape captured only static. But at minute 2, 3 faint beats cut through the hiss pause, 3 beats again. Like something living buried, refusing to sleep. Science can't explain everything, faith can't either. Somewhere between them, folklore breathes. Even now, elders say, the Conjure woman walks. When storms come barefoot, calm, her lantern glowing that strange electric blue. They say if she passes your door and you've done no wrong, the night will stay quiet. But if you've broken a promise or forgotten a name that deserved remembering, The river will rise at your steps. And when thunder rolls across the delta, they still sing that old refrain. Light in the window, Lord, keep the flood from rising. The young call it a hymn. The elders know better. They call it a message, a rhythm, a remembrance, a warning. History forgets what folklore repeats. Yet when the two walk side by side, paper and prayer ink and hum, they build a monument stronger than stone. And so Rachel's story endures. Her legend, half documented, half dreamed, becomes a mirror for every spirit who ever refused to be erased. If you go there now, down the road that bends into shadow past the sagging oaks and whispering moss, you'll find nothing but roots, water, and silence. And yet sometimes the air trembles, a shimmer at the edge of dusk, a soft pulse in the ground, the faintest echo of a song. And through the mist, if you're brave enough to keep watching a small blue light steady as breath, swaying like memory itself. Because the dead don't always want revenge. Sometimes they just want to be remembered. The deeper you go into Hollow Bend, the quieter everything becomes. Not silence, not exactly, but something that sits beneath it, like the hum of the world holding its breath. The trees grow closer here, leaning toward each other, as if whispering secrets. The air grows heavier, sweet with decay and rain. And somewhere faintly that rhythm returns, the slow, steady throb of something alive beneath the soil. People still argue whether it's real, that hum, that pulse, or just imagination. But the records, they hint otherwise. In 1941, an anthropologist from Tulane University, Dr. Charles Myers, came to Adams County to study post-slavery spiritual practices. His notes, now brittle and faded, mention a site at the end of a road that no map admits. He describes ruins overgrown with vines. Structure partially collapsed, interior cool, though air outside exceeds 90 degrees. And then one line written alone, underlined twice. Felt vibration through soles of feet, no wind present. He returned 3 weeks later with sound equipment, heavy reel-to-reel, the kind powered by a car battery. His assistant, a student named Louise Garland, wrote in her diary, "Professor kept saying the ground was breathing. I didn't want to believe him, but when we stood there, I swear I heard it too. Not a hum, a heartbeat." Their recording vanished before it reached the university. Garland quit her post a month later and never spoke publicly about Hollow Bend again. That same year, a church nearby St. Matthew's collapsed during a storm. No one was inside, but the bell tolled on its own before the wind even touched it. Parishioners said it was the Conjure Woman's warning. Stories layered over facts, facts buried beneath folklore, until the line between them dissolves like mist on the river. One night, years after Myers' visit, a family moving through the delta, the Carters' descendants of freedmen set up camp near the old bend. They didn't know the story. They were travelers heading south to Louisiana for work. It was late September, the kind of night when the air feels too still, too watchful. Their daughter, 8 years old, woke just before dawn. She said she saw a light floating by the water, soft blue wavering like breath. She thought it was a lantern. She followed it down the hill, barefoot, humming to herself. When her parents found her, she was standing ankle-deep in the river, eyes open, mouth moving, singing a tune no one had taught her. They pulled her back, shaking her awake. She whispered one sentence before fainting. She said, "The names are safe." The child never spoke again. Not from fear, not from harm, but as if words no longer belonged to her. She lived another 50 years in silence. Folklore says the Conjure Woman marked her not as punishment, but as a vessel. That the girl's silence was the price of carrying voices older than language itself. And then there's the map. During renovations of the Adams County Courthouse in 1978, workers found a packet of documents sealed behind a wall, dated Reconstruction era, signed by federal officers. Inside was a fragment of a map, inked in brown, drawn by hand. On it, an outline of the Pearl River and a small circle labeled Bend Hollow Restricted Zone. Underneath faint pencil notes, sound phenomena observed, possible magnetic variation. But what caught the archivist's attention wasn't the map. It was the piece of paper folded beneath it, an inventory of bureau officials stationed in the county from 1870 to 1873. 7 names. Everyone marked with the same notation beside it, fate unknown. The same phrase that appeared in Rachel's record. The archivist who cataloged it, a woman named Eleanor Parks, wrote a letter years later describing the discovery. In it, she confessed something she never entered in the official report. The night I handled those papers, I dreamt of a woman standing by a broken doorway. She said, "Write what they forgot." When I woke, my hands smelled of smoke. Some hauntings announce themselves with fear, others with memory. The Conjure House became both. By the mid-20th century, it was more ruin than structure, a skeleton wrapped in vines, a threshold without walls. But people still came. Pilgrims, believers, doubters. Some left offerings, bits of cloth, coins, cornmeal. Some came only to listen. They said if you stayed long enough, you'd hear the sound of pages turning in the dark. Slow, deliberate, like a ledger, being written by invisible hands. And maybe that's what it was, history rewriting itself where no one could erase it again. The climax of this story isn't fire or death, it's revelation. That in the place where paper failed, memory endured. One afternoon in 1983, a historian named Daniel White, researching folk religion in post-emancipation Mississippi, interviewed an elderly woman named Lillian Brooks. She was 93, blind and sharp as river glass. When he asked if she'd ever heard of Rachel, she smiled slow, knowing, and said, "Child, you standin' on her ground." White thought she was joking. But she began to hum low and soft that same tune recorded decades before, "Light in the window, Lord. Keep the flood from rising." When she finished, she said, "She walk when folks forget." Then she turned her head toward him, eyes white with age, and whispered, "And you already forgettin', ain't you?" That was the last interview White ever did. He left the Delta and never published his manuscript. But his field recorder was found years later in an estate sale. When played back, the tape was blank except for 6 seconds at the end. A woman's voice, distant, echoing through static, whispering, "You see me now." Fact or folklore, evidence or echo, it no longer matters. Because in the end, they merge, each feeding the other. The Conjure Woman becomes more than one person, more than one century. She becomes a truth too heavy for a single lifetime. You can still visit Hollow Bend today. Nothing remains but a hollow in the ground, a ring of stones swallowed by moss. Yet if you stand there, if you close your eyes, you can feel it. That faint tremor beneath your feet, slow, patient, endless. It feels like the heartbeat of the land itself, like something buried long ago, still trying to rise. And if you listen close, really close, you might hear her voice in the wind. Soft, deliberate, carrying the rhythm of a prayer that never found its end. Light in the window. Lord, keep the flood from rising. Then silence, not empty, but full. The kind of silence that feels like waiting. Because maybe the haunting was never the blue light, or the voices, or the jar of names. Maybe the haunting is the forgetting, and the hum beneath the ground is just history trying to speak again. They say the river runs quieter near Hollow Bend now, that no fish swim near the old crossing, that birds refuse to nest in the trees that grew from her roof beams. But every spring, when the rains come, the water turns the same shade of blue, deep, faintly glowing. And for a few days, the surface ripples like it's breathing. No one fishes there, no one builds. They let it be, because some places are not meant to be conquered. They're meant to be remembered. And somewhere beyond time and ruin, beyond flood and forgetting, a woman stands by her doorway once more. Lantern in hand, light, steady, eyes closed, listening, waiting, watching. The hum returns. The ground stirs. The story exhales. And if you listen close enough, It sounds like a heartbeat that refuses to die. The story of Hollow Bend never really ended. It only quieted like a song that fades, but never stops echoing. Today, the map of Adams County doesn't mark it anymore. The bend itself has shifted the river, carved a new path, swallowing what was left of the old road and the clearing where the Conjure House once stood. If you drive there now, all you'll find is water and reeds. A silence so thick it feels like memory itself. Yet, for those who still remember, the silence hums. Old families in the Delta still tell their children, "Don't call her name after dark." Some say she's sleeping. Others say she never sleeps. In their prayers, she's become something gentler, a guardian spirit, a keeper of the lost, the voice that hums between thunderclaps. And when storms sweep through the bayou, when the lightning turns, the water-silver mothers hush their babies with that old refrain. Light in the window, Lord. Keep the flood from rising. The historians come and go. They bring their clipboards, their cameras, their microphones. They want proof coordinates, artifacts, a bone, a page, a jar. But Hollow Bend gives them nothing. Every photograph blurs. Every recording hums. Every compass twitches, as if the place itself refuses to be translated. One researcher from the Smithsonian in 1996 wrote a field report after visiting the site. The air was unusually heavy. No wildlife present. Ground tremored lightly without visible cause. Equipment malfunctioned, batteries drained. Colleague reported hearing a woman's voice beneath the wind, though I detected nothing. At the bottom of the page, a single note scrawled by hand, "Feels alive." And still, stories find their way out. A preacher from Natchez claims he saw a blue light move across the river one Good Friday, floating low and steady as if carried by an unseen hand. A fisherman swore his radio picked up a woman humming though the dial was turned to static. A young man camping near the site said he woke to footprints circling his tent, small bear deep in the mud, and heard a whisper close to his ear, "Remember my name, remember my..." Whether it's faith or folklore, or something in between, depends on who you ask. But everyone agrees on one thing: the name Rachel still belongs to that place. Even the wind seems to say it when it passes through the reeds, soft, slow. Rachel. For decades, scholars have tried to separate fact from legend. But in doing so, they miss the point. The Conjure House and the woman who lived there was never just a ghost story. It was a record. A living document written in soil song and silence. The Bureau reports give us names. The folklore gives us meaning. Together they form something sacred, a chorus the past refused to bury. And maybe that's why her hum still lingers, because every story of survival needs someone to keep it breathing. When the elders gather in the cool of evening, they speak of her not as fear, but as memory. They say she kept the names of those the world forgot: soldiers, mothers, runaways, dreamers, locked inside her songs. And when you hear that low vibration under the ground, it isn't warning. It's recognition. It's the land remembering the weight of the footsteps that once crossed it. In the archives, her record ends with two words: fate unknown. But out here beneath the moss, the flood, the hum, her fate is anything but unknown. It's written in the rhythm of every storm, in the lull between thunder and dawn. If you stand there long enough, if you close your eyes and listen, you'll hear the same heartbeat the Bureau men wrote about. The same whisper that followed the journalist home. The same voice that sang the flood away. It doesn't frighten, it steadies you, because some hauntings are not curses, they're continuations. A way for history to keep speaking, even when no one's left to write. And when you walk away down that long dirt road, fading into the fog, you'll feel it a faint tug, like a hand resting on your shoulder. You'll want to look back. Don't. Just listen. Light in the window. Lord, keep the flood from rising. The voice is softer now, fading into the hum of cicadas, into the rhythm of the river. But it's there. Always there. That's how Hollow Bend keeps its promise, not through walls or ruins, but through echo, through story, through breath. Rachel's house may be gone. Her body may be dust. But her sound, her presence still moves through the water like pulse through a vein. And every time someone speaks her name, every time the song is sung, the light flickers again behind that unseen window. The blue flame sways once more. The ground hums back. The air holds its breath. Because the Conjure woman was never meant to vanish, she was meant to remain. You've just heard a record from a history that never closed. And maybe somewhere in the silence that follows, you'll realize she's still listening. Don't look away.